Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's episode, I'm joined by Elaine Dorward-King, who's an accomplished mining executive and board director with over 3 decades of international experience in the resources sector. Elaine currently serves on a non-executive directorship for a few different companies, Sibanye-Stillwater, Kenmare Resources and NovaGold, and has previously held senior leadership roles at Newmont and Rio Tinto. In our conversation today, we're going to explore Elaine's journey from operational leadership to board service, unpack what board of directors actually do, and discuss what makes for an effective corporate governance. We're also going to touch on the evolving landscape in ESG and diversity and in ballrooms, and the continued relevance of social license to operate. A topic Elaine will be moderating a panel on the upcoming Resourcing Tomorrow conference in London this December, where the premier gathering for the world's mining leaders take place at the Business Design Centre from the 2nd to the 4th of December. What sets this event apart is an unmatched audience with C-suite executives from some of the biggest mining companies worldwide, and over 40 government ministers and leading mining technology providers, and a lot more people in attendance. Dig Deep podcast is proud to partner Resourcing Tomorrow, and with this there's some discounts if you register through us, with all the details accompany in the show notes. So take a look, take advantage, and hopefully we will see you there. Elaine, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you, and appreciate your time. And as we always start these podcasts off, I just wondered if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your career. As I mentioned, you've been in the industry for over 3 decades. I just wondered if you can run us through your career, how it's developed to what it is to today.
I'd be happy to. I'll try to keep it as short as possible.
You can say the audience actually do like this part of the episode, so take as long as you like.
Okay. Well, I've had the good fortune in my career to work for 3 wonderful companies across the chemical industry, the consulting industry, and the mining sector. Most of my career has been in the mining sector with Rio Tinto and Newmont. And because of the opportunities that I've been provided to travel around the world and to continuously be challenged to learn new things, I've been able to see a lot and develop a range of expertise that I'll come to later that's attractive for the board work. I guess the thing about my career is I started out very focused on being a technical expert in the environmental space, and I moved from that to grow my portfolio to health and safety, community affairs, external relations, and moving from a technical expert to a functional leader, to a business leader, and then back to a functional leader. I've been able to see and think about how we strategically work on improving our environmental performance, our contributions to society, and doing that both in the immediate, the short term, and in the long term. So when I was thinking about leaving full-time executive roles, I knew I wasn't ready to just retire, that I felt like I still had a lot to contribute. And the primary role of boards, as opposed to management, is not only their fiduciary duty, which I'll talk about some more, but it's to think long-term and to think strategically and to help the management team and challenge the management team to think that way. And I thought, well, that would be a good fit for me in the next stage of my career. And that's how I wound up thinking about board service as the transition from full-time technical expert or executive roles.
For those of us that are not exposed to working closely with company boards, what do actually boards of directors actually, I suppose, do? And I suppose sometimes it can be a little mysterious as to what their actual role is. Is it also opaque as to how people are recruited to non-executive director leadership roles as well? So I just wondering if you can, I suppose, firstly explain what boards actually do, and I suppose also what the process is in terms of recruiting for people for boards.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So boards are the governing bodies of companies. They're responsible for affirming or helping to set the strategic direction of companies. They have the responsibility for selecting and managing the senior leadership of the company, and primarily for protecting the interest of the shareholders. For public companies, boards have the final word on M&A, on dividends, and on hiring and firing of the most senior leaders, so the CFO, the CEO, etc. And it's important to understand that for a public company in particular, but also for a private company, the board's primary role is as a fiduciary of the company. So protecting the interest of shareholders and ensuring that legal compliance is followed, that we're aligned with all of our regulatory obligations. We have the duty to ensure the company is managed responsibly and ethically, and in a manner that's going to lead to the long-term success of the company and to the benefit of its shareholders, who are the owners of the company. So when a board is looking to recruit a new director, they typically start with thinking about what are the skills and expertise that are missing on the board, what do we need to add to the board table, and then they want to follow a process that will ensure that they get a slate of candidates to look at that have the right skills and expertise, but represent diversity of thought, of thinking, of background, that sort of thing. And once they have that, the other important thing is it's important that directors, when we're trying to recruit a new director, it's very valuable that they're fully independent of the CEO, of other directors, of having significant financial interest in the company if possible, because again, that's going to lead to more independence in how the board thinks about and solves problems. Now, medium to large tier companies would likely follow that good governance sequence by getting a search firm to help them identify those candidates so that they are not relying on their own relationships or their people that they know, that they are really looking at the full spectrum of talent that's available out there. And then they would evaluate those people, interview those people, and move forward. It's important to understand that, when you're putting together a board, you are looking for the different skill sets that you need on that particular board. You're looking for people with the right experience for whatever the issues are, the commodities you're working in, the geographies you're working in. And you're also looking for people that can work together with others, because board work is a team sport. You want to have a collegial board where people are respectful and the board works together and trust each other. But individual directors also need to be willing to speak up, to challenge assumptions, to make sure that they're expressing their views from the position that they come from. It's often difficult for some of us to make that transition from being a senior executive that's used to making decisions and moving forward, to being someone who is actively listening around the table and then, in a hopefully consensus manner, moving forward.
In terms of skills of non-executive directors, obviously some non-execs may have a geology background, they may have an engineering background. That's more of a discipline background that may have. What other skills and I suppose personal attributes do you think a non-executive director should have? And I suppose when you've been in boards and appointing non-exec directors, apart from their experience and background, is there other skills that you're looking for?
Well, every company is going to, at different times in their evolution, going to want to have a different skills matrix around the board table, quite likely. And you want to have some people that are financial experts. You're going to want to have operational experts. You're increasingly want to have someone who's an expert in environmental and social matters. You often boards want someone who's a governance expert or comes from a legal background. So, and geology is also important. And increasingly, boards are looking to appoint someone who has a deeper understanding of technology, of artificial intelligence, of automation, and how we make sure we're maximizing the use of technology to be as efficient as we can, and to reduce the tedium of some work, and to get people out of the line of fire to improve safety performance. So, the skills matrix is can vary from board to board depending on what their needs are. But often you always want to have a broad collection of people. You don't want to have everybody having been a CEO, which by the time you get to be a CEO, you're largely a generalist. But at the same time, you don't want to have everybody that's just a financial expert or just an operational leader. You want to have a diversity of people. The other things that are important are, as I mentioned, understanding the difference between serving on a board and it's board service. I think that's an important thing for people to understand, as opposed to being part of management, that you have to take a step back, and you're not there to solve the day-to-day problems of the company or to make day-to-day decisions. You're there to make sure the business strategy is moving in the right direction, that we've thought about the risks associated with delivering on that business strategy, and that the company has in place the right systems and processes to mitigate those risks. So you're looking for people that can work together and can think that holistic way, and not want to take control of a particular aspect that management should really be doing. Often boards are also looking for people that have relationships, outside of the mining sector, whether that's with, government or civil society or other stakeholders that are important to the success of the company, in terms of we need to understand what do they think about what we're planning to do, and do they have suggestions for how we might move forward better? How can we expedite permitting if that's an issue for the company? So sometimes you're looking for people with contacts and connections and insights into areas that are outside of the specific mining sector.
We see in the media reports of lapses in good corporate governance, often resulting in negative impacts for shareholders and other stakeholders, such as employees or even communities. Obviously, some examples include disastrous investment decisions or executive officers accused of fraud, corruption, negligence. Stakeholders then ask, rightly so, where was the board and what are they doing about these unhappy events that are obviously unfolding. Just wondering if you just talk a little bit more about the key elements of good corporate governance from a board of directors perspective, and what boards can do to obviously minimize those kind of risks.
Okay. And that's an important question. Well, one of the most important things is, first of all, you recruit a board that is willing to challenge and ask questions. And then individual board members are willing to speak up, to make sure they're understanding the situation, that management really is providing all the information and all the background that the board needs to make the right decisions. If people are reluctant to speak up, then you often don't get the whole story, you know. And whether you're uncomfortable, it could be a range of things. Why haven't we met the production numbers for the last 4 quarters? Why are the financial results not what they should be? Why are we having so many safety incidents? Why is this particular capital project over budget and the timeline is drifting? And you need to ask the first and the second and the third question. And it's important to note that, a board that's willing to ask those hard questions is usually one where the directors do have some independence from personal relationships with management. So they've been recruited to provide that fresh perspective, that independent outlook. If everyone is a golfing buddy of the CEO, they may be less willing to challenge. And that's why, when we come back to that recruitment process, while it's important that follow good corporate governance guidelines so that people can look at that board and say, that's a board that is going to look after, know what their fiduciary duties are, mind those fiduciary duties, and act in a way that's going to be to the benefit of the company. So and that's another thing people need to think about, is there's a good amount of personal liability associated with being on a board of directors these days. So if you're invited to be on a board, it's your obligation to do due diligence with regard not only to the company, but with the other directors. Make sure you're comfortable with the chairman. The chair is a very important role. They are the position where they make sure the board is acting in a way that's collegial, but with the right amount of challenge, and that the relationship and the communication between management and the board is good. So you need to have all those things in place to do the best to reduce the risk of these bad things happening.
You just mentioned liabilities. So following on from that, and I suppose it does get often overlooked, is there specific liabilities that non-executive directors, when they do start as a board member, what kind of liabilities would they have if something goes wrong, for instance? And again, it depends on what goes wrong, but what liabilities do they generally have? Because I think it probably does get overlooked.
Well, the main liability is being seen not to have exercised duty of care with regard to the financial health and success of the company. So one of the things you want to make sure, most companies have directors and officers insurance, which protects the board from catastrophic events, lawsuits associated with certain things. But you can be liable if you're found to be, personally negligent in your duty of care responsibilities. So that's why it's important to make sure that you are thinking about these things when you're on a board, that you are there to serve for the good of the company and its owners, which are the shareholders, and ask these hard questions about ethics, basically. Are the systems in place with regard to reporting of grievances, investigating allegations of corruption and fraud? These things can occur, and they need to be investigated fully and independently. And then there need to be people need to be held accountable, and that all ultimately rolls up to the board of directors, even though much of that can and should be managed by management in the first instance.
You spoke about what companies look for in terms of obviously individual directors, but could you also talk about what factors that inform the overall makeup of a well-functioning board of directors?
It I've probably mentioned it already a little bit. It's that willingness to, bring to the table those things that you bring that are special and add value. So your expertise, your knowledge, your experiences from your background, and be willing to speak up, not just be there in body, but speak up and contribute. But a well-functioning board is one where the members listen to each other and are able to have robust discussion. Even if if they don't agree on a point, they're able to talk about that and try to understand each other's point of view. And that's where the chair is very important, to make sure that different views are heard, that the tone and the tenor of the conversation remains respectful. And then at the end of that robust discussion and decision making, a well-functioning board will line up behind what's hopefully a consensus decision. So you may disagree inside the room, but when you exit the room, people need to be unified around that decision, and everyone own that, whether they initially, that might have been their first choice or not. And those are hallmarks of a well-functioning board. Individual members are able to challenge, you're able to have robust discussion, you understand your responsibilities, and at the end of the day, hopefully you reach a consensus that everyone can support.
You bring up the importance of a diverse board table. People obviously with different skill sets, life experiences, varied operational and functional backgrounds, as well as obviously gender, racial, ethnicity, diversity. In some jurisdictions, obviously, it's become quite unfashionable, even perilous, to talk about the importance of obviously diverse workplace, and for example, to set targets for gender diversity. And also, I suppose there's been pushback for some quarters towards environmental, social, and governance aspects. For example, setting targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions or achieving other environmental and social performance objectives. I just wonder if you could just describe how I suppose you're thinking about how you perceive companies trying to respond to these shifting social political landscapes, whilst continuing to manage the broad suite of risks comprised of obviously ESG and sustainability space.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a bit of a mouthful, so I apologize.
It's a big question, but it's very important that we talk about that, and it is something that leaders and boards of directors are thinking about. I'll take the gender diversity piece first.
Yep.
There's a lot of data that out there that shows that teams that are diverse in diversity of thought, of background, of experience, perform better. They are more innovative. They deliver results more successfully, on time, on budget, with high quality. We know that a diverse and inclusive workplace is one where people are more productive, and one where people want to work, where people want to come and contribute and do their very, very best. So the way that leaders in companies are thinking about this is that, their obligation is not to whatever the political whim of the day is. Their obligation is to run the company in the best possible way to deliver the best possible results. So you want to have a workforce that is the very best you can get. And that means having access to 100% of the talent that's available. And we know from the past that even though we say that, we mean that, and we want to do that, sometimes you don't get there unless you do hold leaders accountable for, recruiting women, for having mechanisms to make sure that when you're considering an opening for a job, that you have a diverse slate of people to consider, that, it just doesn't happen miraculously. And most of the companies I know have not swayed from their desire to have the best workforce they can, to have the safest workforce they can. And that means that you are going to continue to move toward having a diverse workforce. Now, some companies have moderated their language in public about that to talk about an inclusive workforce instead of the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, that's up to them. And maybe that is the right thing to do. But in practice, I see very little swerving away, at least in my realm, from that commitment. And again, it's similar with ESG, where, in both cases, what you're really doing is trying to manage risk for the company. You're trying to make sure you're optimizing the recognition of opportunities and recognizing threats and putting in place actions to mitigate those threats. That's managing risk. And I think one of the reasons there's pushback on ESG is that the demands on corporations for reporting on a number of ESG metrics have become so onerous, whether that's been imposed by financial investment companies, regulatory authorities, the agendas of civil society, even industry groups with trying to raise standards and then having reporting, that there's been some pushback on that, and forgetting that the reason we first started focusing on social and environmental metrics was to manage the whole suite of risk that can get in the way of a company delivering its business strategy. We know that a well-managed company, indicators of a well-managed company are: what is their safety performance? How are they managing environmental liability? The whole suite of things that can, hamper short-term results and completely derail long-term strategy. So the boards that I'm aware of and the company leaders that I talk to, especially in the mining sector, we get this, are not deviating from their values-driven programs to really understand, what are their impacts on the environment, on local communities. How are we striving to leave a positive legacy? How are we measuring that? Yes, we are going to report that because it's essential to our ability to do what we need to do. The best ore body in the world is completely worthless if we can't get it out of the ground. We can't get it out of the ground unless we have our permits in place, the support of local communities, the absence of litigation and threats from civil society. We need to be good performers, not just in policy and setting targets, but in what we're actually doing on the ground, and that everyone in the company understands that. So, I think that mining companies probably are in a position, because we have to go where the ore bodies are. We must engage with our stakeholders, and we've gotten better and better and better at that. That this political pushback on reporting is not getting in the way of our focusing on the things that are truly important on the ground in terms of performance. I think many of us would welcome more scrutiny on making sure that the requirements for reporting are as relevant as they can possibly be, and that efficiencies can be recognized in permitting processes in different jurisdictions. But that doesn't take away from the need to do the right thing on the ground and maximize our opportunity in the short and medium term to deliver on our business strategy and minimize long-term liability for the companies in the future.
As you know, I work in recruitment. I often get candidates ask me about board positions and how they can get onto boards. And I wondered if you could provide any sort of advice as to senior candidates that are looking to get onto maybe their first board position. Is there anything they should be doing to obviously increase their chance of making their first appointment on a board?
Well, one of the main things is make sure that you tell people that's what you're interested in doing, because you could be the best executive technical expert in the world, but people may not think of you in terms of a board role unless you let them know that that is something you'd be interested in. And often it's valuable to contact people that are in your network and ask them for their advice about making that career transition. uh, what what is it like? Is it a good idea? And who do they know that you should talk to, they should talk to? While I talked about what a good governance process looks like for recruiting of board roles, and often you use a search firm, etc., it is true that your network matters. The people that you've worked with throughout your career, the people that who know who know how good you are, can, represent you positively if asked for a reference, or can put your name forward if they're already on a board to that search firm and get you into the mix. I think it's a combination of both. When you're early in your career and you're working hard, you're delivering the goods, you are basically putting money into the bank. You're building your reputation, you're building your expertise. You know, I always tell people, put your hand up, take on a new project, learn something new, grow your skill set. And then when you get to the point in your career where you're ready to transition, and that can happen while you're still an executive, you could take on one board role. Even many CEOs will take on are allowed to take on one board role. You can take some money out of the bank. You're sharing some of those things that you've learned over time and passing that on. So the other thing to do if you're early enough in your career is, build that skill set, build that resume that shows that, you've been willing to take on new things, and that you're into continuous learning. We all have to keep learning. Nowadays, no matter what our age or what we're doing, the world's changing really fast, and that ability to continue to learn, not just rely on what you've done in the past, is going to be a key attribute for people to serve on board roles as well. So it's partly your network. Let people know what you want to do, and contact those people that might be able to help you the most with either connections or understanding what's involved. You need to know why you want to be on a board. Not everybody is suited for it or wants to do it. You need to know why you want to do it and what value you're going to bring to the board table. And then reach out to folks, whether it's board directors, other executives, people that are search firm experts or CEOs, Rob. You've got to let people like that know, and then I think your opportunities are much, much greater.
Yeah, certainly. And lastly, you're going to be moderating a panel at the Resourcing Tomorrow conference in London, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, which is coming up soon in a few weeks' time. And you're going to be focusing on revisiting social license to operate. And obviously, you've just covered a little bit of that there. I would just wonder if you could just say a few words about the panel and the ongoing importance, obviously, of the topic to the mining and metal sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. It'll be on Thursday morning that week, the 4th of December, and the full title is Revisiting Social License to Operate, Earning and Maintaining Community Support. And, we've been talking about this for decades, how important it is for us to do that. And the mining sector is far ahead in many cases of other sectors in understanding what that means and being able to do it well. We've made a lot of progress in understanding, that it requires honest and forthright conversations with communities and stakeholders. It requires listening. It requires building those long-term relationships to build build trust, and not be transactional. So we know that, and there are many ideas of good practice many examples of good practice out there where companies and communities have been able to work together to co-create an environment where the benefits accrue to both the mining company and to the community, whether that's participation in the supply chain, outright employment, jobs, improvement of living standards and conditions, etc. But even today, still, we have examples where things are not as good as they could be in terms of that relationship of trust between the community and the company, and the capacity to work together for common benefit. We may not have the same objectives as a community and a mining company, but we certainly ought to be able to work together for some common goals to be mutually beneficial. And if we can't do that at any level, then everyone suffers. We're creating less value overall, and in particular, we're not going to be able to try to ensure that the positive impacts from our mining operations outweigh those negative impacts, because we have to be honest, there are negative impacts associated with mining. It's noisy and it can be dusty, and you have a whole lot of people coming in that weren't there before, and you have to manage those kinds of changes in the environment with the positive impacts on the local local economy and on people's well-being. So our panel is going to be great. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, building trust, what things have gone right, where the challenges are. And I expect it to be a very robust discussion. We have a panel. We've got two CEOs, Paul Coe with the BCM Group and Paul Gruner, who's CEO of Ticho Investment Corporation and group of companies. We've got two mining sector practitioners, Daniela Savik of the Eurasian Resources Group and Emmanuel Badu of Anglo Gold Ashanti. And we have a senior representative of civil society with Emily Greenspan, who's with Oxfam America. So I anticipate that we're going to have a very open and robust conversation to explore some of these ideas. One of the focuses will be on local economic development, because that's one of the ways that we can leave a lasting legacy if we can help people develop the skills and create businesses that have a lifetime beyond when the mine is operating, that people can learn how to run a business, they can have other customers other than ourselves, and there's a legacy there to benefit the community. Also incorporated in that from the experiences of some of the panelists will be how we can improve Indigenous peoples' ability to participate in the economic benefits and improvement in well-being, and also ensuring women have opportunities as well in that dynamic, which is not always automatic. So I'm looking forward to it. Thursday, the 4th of December.
Great. Elaine, really appreciate your time. Thank you for obviously sharing your story, giving your insights and your knowledge of board positions and boards in general. Obviously you've got a lot of expertise in that area, and hopefully our listeners will pick up some golden nuggets from some of the content that you've given out there. If our audience have actually any questions around non-executive boards, etc., how can they go about doing that? Obviously, I know you're on LinkedIn. Are you on any other social networks at all?
I'm afraid that's the only one that I am involved with, but I do actually eventually answer those contacts and connections. So that's the best way to get in touch with me.
No worries. We'll include your LinkedIn profile on the in the show notes. So if anyone's got any questions around boards, hopefully they can reach out to you, and hopefully you'll have the answer.
Yes. Thanks, Rob.
No worries. No, I appreciate your time, and obviously those that are still listening, as mentioned, you're going to be in London from the 2nd to the 4th of December. obviously on the 4th of December, you're going to be on a panel, and I'd imagine any of our audience have any questions, obviously they can come and arrange to meet with yourself before or afterwards, and answer any questions that they may have. So thank you again, and we will see you in London.
All right, Rob, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. I think this episode should be shared amongst many of you listeners that are listening to this episode. And if not, please forward the episode on to others that may be looking, maybe senior or maybe in that executive level, and maybe looking to get into a board position. I think Elaine has certainly dropped a few golden nuggets of what executive directors should be looking, and hopefully some of the content that Elaine's provided will help you in your next move, whether it's your first appointment or whether you're an existing non-executive director. Hopefully you can take a few things away from this. So thank you for listening, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.